Stand by. Here we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Judy Maggio with KLRU's Decibel. I'm here with Councilmember Greg Casar, who is fresh off a trip to Tornillo, El Paso area in the tent city. So I want to begin finding out about your experience there, because most of us have only seen pictures on TV, seen video, but you were there. What did you see and what did you experience?
Yeah, so I and several of my colleagues from the Austin City Council and our mayor, Steve Adler, all went to Tornillo just last week. It feels like it was just yesterday. I drove across the states to get there, and we were joined by mayors from all over the country who were there to send a message that it's not who we want to be. It's not the right thing to do for kids to be in basically tent jails out in the desert. And it was just so impactful for me to actually be there, because just like so many other Austinites and people across the country, I'd been reading about it in the news every day, seeing pictures of the kids in that tent city in our own home state. But it was just different actually being there, when you actually could see the tents and see kids walking out of tents. My staff actually, when I was on the border fence looking at the tents, saw a bus full of children being sent into the jail camps. And so it was really emotional and sort of disturbing to recognize that that was actually happening here in our home state. And so, yeah, I'm happy to keep talking about it, but it really was kind of, it was just so different actually being there and recognizing that it's real.
So what did you all hope to accomplish? I know that the mayor went because there was this meeting of many of the mayors of the big cities across the country, but what was the purpose, and do you feel like your mission was accomplished?
Yeah, the purpose was mostly to send a really strong message that these kids should be in our cities. They're our kids. My district in North Central Austin has more non-citizens than any other part of the city, and I think it makes the city great. I think it adds to the vibrancy and culture and resilience and the economy and everything else in our city. And so prior to this horrible so-called zero tolerance policy, these kids were kept with their parents in our cities. They could seek asylum and come to parts of Austin and be a part of our community as they sought refuge here. And now they're actually in these tent jail sites. So a big part of it was to send the message that they're welcome as a part of our cities, because they are Texas and they are our cities. I think it really drew attention to the issue, and that was really important because the fight carries on. But in some ways, it was also really hard to leave. Once we did this press conference. There was over 20 mayors there. There was so many press and cameras from all over the country. There were people from the community, and then people started leaving, and we were like leaving, but the kids were still in the
Do you feel guilty a little bit, or just strange?
I think more than anything else, it was just sort of horrifying. I don't know, like it was just like a sense of dread, right? I mean, guilt. I think there's a quote from a rabbi that I'm not Jewish, but there's a rabbi whose quote I've really leaned on and relied on through some of these times, which is that very few are guilty, but all are responsible, right? And so even though there's only a few people that are making these sorts of decisions, really this is our responsibility in our community. In our name, children are being incarcerated in tents in 100+ degree weather. It was going to hit it was a high of about 105 degrees the day that we were there. And so, so just leaving was really hard. So there's definitely no mission accomplished, but part of it was just to do our part to show where Austin stands on this issue. And I think so many of our community members and constituents appreciated seeing such a large number of elected officials from our community, drop everything and go to Tornillo.
There's been a lot of new developments since you guys were there at the end of last week, so I want to get your reaction to some of these things. The Texas Tribune reported there was a Honduran man who was anonymous, but said that the government said he would get his kids back in exchange for being deported. I don't know if you've read that article, but what would be your reaction to that?
I think that these kids are being used as bargaining chips in so many ways. And kids shouldn't be bargaining chips. They shouldn't be bargaining chips to try to get Congress to do something. They shouldn't be bargaining chips to get to say these people aren't welcome here and they shouldn't be here. These are kids that just shouldn't be in jails or prisons at all. No, but the kids shouldn't be in cages with their parents, and they definitely shouldn't be in cages separated from their parents. I think this all just started on the day that Trump announced his campaign for president, in which he called Mexicans and Mexican Americans, criminals and rapists. It's a continuation of that trend. When this whole thing was going and getting in the press, he said that there was an infestation of immigrants, and that's just the kind of dehumanizing language that is sending us down this path. It's really sickening and really scary, and now that kids are in the middle of it, I think it's hitting its lowest point. And so those kids just shouldn't be bargaining chips in any way, because really the president could, with a flick of a pen or just make a phone call right now, could say, let's stop putting kids in cages, because before this zero tolerance policy, these kids that were coming with their parents weren't winding up in these sorts of conditions.
So in a perfect world, in Greg Casar's perfect world, what would we do to solve the immigration issues that we see? I know that Congress is battling right now on Capitol Hill trying to come up with a reform bill. They can't see eye to eye. Meanwhile, the DACA students are still hanging in the balance. What would be your perfect scenario? I doubt that your perfect scenario will happen, but what would it be?
I think because we're so far from a perfect scenario, it's hard even to talk about that, right? There's so many short-term obvious things that we could be doing. You know, under President Obama, there was a Republican-sponsored bill that had that passed the Senate and had majority support in the House, but they just didn't put it up for a vote in the same ways that Supreme Court justices weren't put up for votes. So I think that there are even significantly imperfect, because I feel like when we talk about the perfect, then we become even more polarized than where we're at.
So where do you think we can meet in the middle, I guess, is a better question.
I think that even the imperfect comprehensive immigration reform bills that have been up under the last two administrations that I would even have some serious concerns about are still so far beyond and ahead of where we are right now. And actually where we are right now is going backwards, right? There's attempts to limit legal immigration. There's attempts to limit people coming here from Muslim nations. People who are coming into our imperfect system are being treated even worse on purpose, right? And so while a lot of folks have talked about we need a comprehensive immigration reform solution, and I totally agree, this story about kids being in cages in the desert has nothing to do with that. This is, even within our broken immigration system, this is saying, okay, we have a broken system and we're gonna purposefully make it worse on the backs of these children. Like this has nothing to do with that. It just has to do with the president making a decision that when somebody shows up with a parent that is a loving parent that's trying to do what any of us would do for our kids, keep them safe, give them a decent future, that they're saying they're people that are escaping violence, that's why they're seeking asylum, that instead of leaving the process the way it is, we're going to make it even worse for them by separating that child and that parent and putting them in a tent city.
What about the 2,000 kids that are still out there that haven't been reunified? I watched all the Sunday morning news shows, and the folks in the Trump administration say there is a plan in place that these children will be reunited, but then I hear other reports that they've lost kids and they don't know where. I mean, these kids have been found out all over the country. So what were you told when you visited the tent city about reunification, at least for that area?
Yeah, so when I went to the, we went to the gates to the entrance of the sort of jail tent encampment, and I asked to be let in. And I've actually visited the detention center here outside of Austin in Taylor. The Hutto Detention Center, but it's in Taylor.
And that's mostly moms,
It's mostly moms.
Yeah.
And in the past, they've just let you in and you can visit
I
people.
remember when you guys went in and kind of demanded
and
to get in.
I've gone in and visited people. Now, one time when there was a politically charged situation where a woman who was being held there spoke up about facing sexual assault inside of the jail, and I went with press, they told me that you couldn't be let in. And it was a similar situation in Tornillo where I think it makes sense for elected officials to be able to be let in to look at facilities. But because of all the attention to this, they told us no, we couldn't go in. When I asked questions about how the kids were being taken care of, if there were nurses and doctors, how they kept track of the kids' names, if they called them by name, if they had plans, if they had records of where their parents were, if they had plans to get them back with their parents based on the Trumps, they just said they didn't have any information, and that the person working the gate was just there for security purposes and not working for this detention center. And when I said that I was willing to stay and wait all day
to get an answer,
just for somebody who worked for the detention center to come talk to us, they said they couldn't do that. And when I asked them, well, is there somebody on site that works for the detention center? They said yes, but they wouldn't be available all day. And so I think that level of lack of transparency is what is really chilling, right? What we should have is an affirmative plan on how to reunify those kids with those parents outside of a jail. And so when the administration
And of course, there are people on the other side saying that it's not really a jail. That's what.
That's right. And
the
I think,
detention center is what they.
exactly. And regardless of euphemisms, in my view, you know, if you are locked up somewhere and you can't see your family and you're not allowed to leave and your family is available in the same country as you and the authorities know where your family is, but you can't leave to see your family can't pick you up and take you.
Yeah.
That sounds to me like incarceration, but you know, I think words matter there. And so that's why I try to refer to it as a jail, because it seems like it is. So in the end, I think that it's important for them to be reunified with their families, but I think it's important also for the public to know that if those kids are reunited with their parents in a similar jail situation, that we're still so far behind where we just were a couple months ago. Before the zero tolerance policy, it made sense that if you were seeking refuge and asylum in this country, you could live in a community with your family and still go through the legal process. And so I just think that that's the really important thing for people to know, that we're so far behind even where we were a couple months ago.
Real quick, I know that an issue near and dear to your heart is in court right now, and that's the paid sick ordinance that you fought so hard for, and there are a lot of business groups that are opposing it. What is the latest from court today?
Yeah, so it's being heard and argued right now.
Okay.
And essentially on our side, on the city's side, is that the 9 members of our 11-member council voted for this policy. It's totally legal under state law. There is no law that says we can't have a paid sick days ordinance, and that there's a real public health and safety reason that when people have to choose between taking care of a sick child or paying the rent, and that they have to skip out on work to take care of their kid, or they send their kid to school sick, there's a real governmental interest in guaranteeing paid sick days. This law exists all over the country, and now it's being considered in Dallas and San Antonio, so it'll cover maybe 4 million Texans by the end of the year. On the other side, there's a challenge saying that this paid sick days law violates the ban on the minimum wage.
Right, the Texas Minimum Wage Act.
But there's a difference between a minimum wage and paid sick days. Our law doesn't raise the minimum wage. I would like to raise the minimum wage, but unfortunately state lawmakers have said the minimum wage should stay as low as legally allowed under federal law, as low as possible. So instead, we're trying to benefit working families' lives through this paid sick days law. There's been similar challenges in other states, and so far in other states, those sick days laws stand strong. So my hope is that the judge will go
Rule in your favor.
Will rule in my favor. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll see.
And in favor of the over 200,000 people who don't have access to sick days in our city right now.
Well, I can imagine, I know you need to get going because you have a very busy schedule, but I can imagine there'll be several issues like this and the bag ban that will be also heard at the state capitol level.
That's right. I think it's important for cities like Austin, but cities across the state, to go on offense instead of continuing to worry that we shouldn't do stuff because the legislature might beat it back. I think it's important for us to pick our battles and pick some battles where working people of all political stripes believe that we can do better. And if you look at surveys around paid sick days, Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike all have some significant level of support for things like paid sick days. And so my hope is that when we go to the legislature and we have 3 cities that have guaranteed everyone paid sick days, that the legislature has some trouble going and telling their constituents why they don't deserve that basic right.
The strategy didn't work for SB 4, though.
It didn't work on SB. Well, it didn't work on SB 4 to an extent, right? They did pass that horrible "Show Me Your Papers" law, but through our legal challenges against that law and our advocacy, we've gotten to the point where, while a police officer, and based on a resolution we just passed, while a police officer can say under this horrible new law, "Show me your papers," so to speak, we still have been able to fight to a place where now we're asking our police officers and our police chief to say, any police officers that says "show me your papers" should also explain your legal right not to show them, because you still have constitutional rights that we won through the court battles. It says you have a right. Police officers aren't immigration enforcement, and so if a police officer asks for your papers and you don't show them, you can't be arrested, you can't be retaliated against. And so
there's some small victories
So
there.
in some ways the battle is still ongoing.
Yeah. Okay. Greg Casar, thanks so much for
you so much.
sharing your thoughts and observations from being down in the valley. And I know that all the council members are probably ready for that break in July.
We are.
It's been a busy year.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for tuning in. And Ben Philpott and I will have Capital Coffee Talk for you, updating you on a lot of city and state issues tomorrow at 12:30 right here on the Decibel Facebook page. Have a great day.
All right.
Okay, thank
I'm
you,
out.
Greg.
Thank you. It was good to see
Do
you.
you know where to go?